RJ Davis is reportedly set to return to North Carolina, and he immediately becomes the odds-on favorite to win National Player of the Year.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host, Andy Patton, and you are joining us at the place to get college basketball content every single day. I want to thank all of you for making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day, and remind you that you can listen to the show ad-free on Amazon Music if you're not doing so already. Today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, make every moment more. Right now, new customers will get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. Well, we got Kentucky and Arkansas recruiting carousel news to discuss. Handful of Kentucky decommits visiting John Calipari in Fayetteville as we record right now. What does that mean for Mark Pope in Kentucky? What does it mean for Calipari? We'll get to that. We also got a six-pack to close out the show, talking transfer portal commitments with a little West Coast flavor on today's show, talking about some guys involved on some teams out west. We're going to get into all of that, but we are leading today's show talking about the news out of Chapel Hill, North Carolina, because we have seen a report from Matt Norlander at CBS, one of the hosts of the Ion College Basketball Podcast, that RJ Davis is set to return for the North Carolina Tar Heels for his fifth and final year of eligibility, using that extra year of COVID eligibility. As it is being recorded right now on Wednesday evening, there has not been confirmation from either North Carolina or RJ Davis, but this is the expectation, is that Davis is coming back. Norlander's a reputable source. He's not going to go out there and write an article and tweet about it unless he's 99+% confident that this is happening. So I think we go ahead and assume that Davis is returning to Chapel Hill, and that is a huge, huge return for Hubert Davis's team. To quote Trilly Donovan on Twitter, who says this very frequently, sometimes the best players or the best additions are the ones you already had. Sometimes it's better to get guys back than to get new players, to get new recruits, new transfers. Just bring back the guys that you already had. And that is a huge case for North Carolina. We're going to talk about RJ Davis, but also worth acknowledging Seth Trimble, who actually did enter the transfer portal, has also withdrawn his name from the portal and is returning to Chapel Hill as well. So two big-time guards coming back for Hubert Davis's team. RJ Davis was, of course, a first-team All-American last year, and he really thrived in that season because in part of the departure of Caleb Love. You can ask any Tar Heels fans. You can ask my co-host Isaac Shade. There was a lot of optimism and hope that the separation of Davis and Love would actually be beneficial for both parties. At least certainly the Carolina fans were hoping it would be beneficial for RJ Davis. It'd be sort of an addition by subtraction type situation where those two guys who are both ball dominant guards just weren't thriving next to each other. And that absolutely was the case. Caleb Love was Pac-12 Player of the Year in the final year of the Pac-12. Meanwhile, RJ Davis, like we said, All-American, finished the season averaging 21.2 points, 3.5 boards, 3.5 assists, and 1.2 steals per game, shot about 45.5% on 2-point shots, and was a sniper from three, just under 40% on the season on just under 8 attempts per game. He was a volume shooter who knocked him down at a very high clip, also about 87% from the free throw line for RJ Davis. He had a 40-point game during the season. He put this team on his back at times. Of course, they had Armando Bacot, who was fantastic, had a tremendous career, one of the all-time greats in North Carolina history. But Davis really did the majority of the legwork to get this team to a 1 seed, to get them into that NCAA tournament. They, of course, lost a little earlier than they would have hoped to that red-hot Alabama team. But Davis was a phenomenal player this season. And now that he's coming back, which again shouldn't be a shock, in part because of the NIL era and in part just because smaller, older guards like RJ Davis are probably not hot commodities at the NBA level. I don't know that Davis would have got drafted at all, even in a pretty weak draft class. I'm not going to pretend to be a draft expert, but if you read in the mock drafts, RJ Davis's name wasn't on there all that much. He's kind of in a similar boat to somebody like Mark Sears, who is expected to come back as well, of just older guards who maybe aren't necessarily the right size and don't have as much upside to be NBA prospects, despite being incredibly good college basketball players. And that's the case with RJ Davis here, because him returning to school, there's a very real chance that he is the front runner right now on April 25th, as you're listening to this, for National Player of the Year next year. Because Zach Edey's gone, folks. He's not coming back. He's in the NBA draft process. So that means there's actually a race. There's actually a conversation that can be had about the National Player of the Year next year, because this last season, it was pretty much just, I think the amount of times that Isaac or I on the show said, if not for Zach Edey, then Dalton Knecht would be Player of the Year, or RJ Davis would be Player of the Year, or so-and-so would be Player of the Year. But we don't have to have that caveat anymore. And Dalton Knecht's not coming back either. So that puts Davis kind of in the driver's seat for this conversation as preseason, way too early preseason, National Player of the Year candidate for his final season at UNC. There's plenty of other strong candidates. Just because Edey and Knecht are gone doesn't mean that this is a shoo-in for RJ Davis by any stretch. Hunter Dickinson is going to be in the conversation if he stays healthy for a full season at Kansas. They got a lot of really great pieces that they've already added in the portal, but I think there's a good expectation that the offense is going to run through him in an even bigger way this upcoming year for the Jayhawks. Ryan Kalkbrenner at Creighton could be in that conversation. Caleb Love. Once again, we could be looking at a Davis versus Love for Player of the Year. That's assuming Caleb Love returns to school. He is in the NBA draft process, but he has maintained his eligibility. Mark Sears at Alabama, another redo of that matchup in the Sweet 16 this past year. Mark Sears had a phenomenal season for Alabama. He could be in that conversation as well. Janai Broome is returning for Auburn. He was a third-team All-American last year. If he takes on a bigger role offensively for that team, puts up some big numbers for Bruce Pearl in the SEC, he could be in that conversation. PJ Hall, if he returns to Clemson, as of right now, I think that's still 50-50. He could be in that conversation as well. Some dark horse candidates. Always gotta toss out the dark horse guys. Cooper Flagg, don't know that he's much of a dark horse candidate necessarily. You just don't see a lot of true freshmen in the running for National Player of the Year, but he could be in that conversation if he's the lead scorer, the lead offense for the Duke Blue Devils. Cam Jones at Marquette is a player I think is going to take a big leap with Tyler Kolek and Oso Ighodaro out the door in Shaka Smart's offense. Graham Ike at Gonzaga, if he continues to do what he did in the second half of last year for a full season, and the Zags end up in a top 10, top 5 team, he could be in that conversation. LJ Cryer at Houston, Alex Caravan at UConn, I think are guys who might end up sneaking their way into that conversation as well. Like I mentioned, RJ Davis, not the only guard returning to North Carolina. Seth Trimble, who had entered his name in the transfer portal, withdrew his name and is officially returning to North Carolina. 6'3" rising junior guard, very highly regarded out of high school. Didn't play much as a freshman, played more last year, still didn't have a huge role, finished the year averaging a little over 5 points, about 2 boards and 1 assist. He did shoot 42% from 3, so he's a very good knockdown shooter. Obviously, Carolina has to find a way to replace Cormac Ryan's production. Ryan was their sharpshooting combo or shooting guard who started last year as a transfer coming over from Notre Dame. He's not in the picture anymore, and I think you could see Trimble step into that role. He's a little undersized to be a starting 2 or a starting 3, depending on what this Carolina team wants to do. If you're starting Davis and Elliot Cadeau and Seth Trimble, you're going to have a little bit of an issue defensively against teams that have bigger guards or bigger wings, because all 3 of those guys aren't I think they're all under 6'3", or at least 6'3" or shorter for those guys. So Trimble's probably not fully stepping into the Cormac Ryan role necessarily, but he could play another very valuable role as a junior for this Carolina team. And I think you look at this team right now and you think, okay, they got Davis coming back, potential National Player of the Year. Trimble's a nice piece for them coming back. Like, is this a team that could be in consideration for a top 2, top 1 preseason team? And I think you're still waiting for a few more additions, because they need to replace Armando Bacot in the front court. They also now need to replace Harrison Ingram. He is not maintaining his college eligibility. He is gone playing professionally. Of course, we mentioned Cormac Ryan. They also lose James Okonkwo to the transfer portal. He's going to head out to Akron. Now, we've seen Hubert Davis's team. They're in the mix with a lot of high-profile transfers. Cade Tyson being the most notable among them. Kobe Brea from Dayton has listed Carolina in his top 5. They're still in the mix for Jonas Adu, although we've kind of been expecting to hear a commitment for Adu to Baylor. We haven't heard it yet, so until that happens, it's definitely definitely possible that Adu ends up somewhere else, potentially in Chapel Hill. But I think until we see the rest of this portal class for Hubert Davis and the Tar Heels, it's a little premature to have them all the way up at the top. But if they land a big time big, if they land Tyson and Adu, for example, I think we're definitely talking about North Carolina, if not right at the very top, very close to it in those preseason rankings ahead of the 24-25 college basketball season. Well, folks, Mark Pope and John Calipari are battling it out right now over multiple five-star recruits. Who has the upper hand? Who's going to ultimately win out before the season begins? We're going to discuss all of that in just a second. Right after I tell you that today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. Folks, we've all been there, either as a player or as a fan. It's halftime. The scoreboard is not looking good. You're feeling low. You're not sure whether your team is going to be able to pull out a win. And that's when you dig deep, lift your head up, and say to yourself, it's time to get back in the game, pull off some bank heists, and take as much of my friends' money as I can. That's right. The smash hit mobile game Monopoly Go lets you compete with your friends to get the most riches and the biggest empire. It's the Monopoly you love, but on your phone anytime with tons of new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your buddies. There's so much you can do. Play on countless dynamic Monopoly boards. Make your friends bankrupt by smashing their landmarks with a wrecking ball. Charge other players rent for your iconic properties. You can even work with your friends to crack open community chests and in tournaments to get extra rewards and climb the leaderboard. So get back out there, put on your game face, and download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or the Google Play Store. Today's episode is also brought to you by Game Time. Folks, the weather out here in the Pacific Northwest is heating up, and that means it's time to go take in some Major League Baseball games. And great news, Game Time is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. Priced on the Game Time app, they actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. And with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. One of my favorite features on Game Time is their last-minute deals. Maybe you want to get in on tickets for the NBA playoffs. You can save up to 60% off buying last minute for not only sporting events, but concerts, comedy, and theater as well. And I often worry about my tickets being fake, but with Game Time's ticket coverage, your purchase is covered by the most flexible customer service policy in the entire ticketing industry. And I love having that peace of mind. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On College Basketball Podcast, and we're switching away from talking about the blue blood North Carolina to talk about another blue blood, the Kentucky Wildcats, although more specifically, talking about the players who have decommitted from Kentucky. Because the expectation all along when John Calipari took the head coaching job at Arkansas, even before Kentucky had made their hire of Mark Pope, was that Calipari was going to be able to bring the majority of the recruits who he had committed to Kentucky in the 2024 class with him to Fayetteville, Arkansas. And in fact, if you talk to a lot of Kentucky fans, Big Blue Nation, if you're out there, one thing we've heard quite a bit is that the majority of fans kind of expected that whatever year ends up being John Calipari's final year is going to be a year where the incoming recruiting class doesn't end up in Lexington. And I think that was a reasonable expectation to have. But at the same time, you couldn't just keep employing John Calipari because you didn't want to lose the recruiting class if the results on the court, namely the lack of NCAA tournament success, wasn't going to change. We finally saw that come to a head at the end of this last season. Calipari, rather than getting fired, ultimately decides to leave and take the head coach job at Arkansas. And now we kind of start to wonder and figure out how many of these pieces are going to end up following suit. And the first domino and the recruiting trail fell a couple of days ago with Karter Knox, the 22nd ranked player in the 24/7 Sports' composite rankings for the class of 2024. He officially flips from Kentucky to Arkansas. He becomes the first defector who is going to officially follow John Calipari to Fayetteville. Now, first recruit defector to do so, Zvonimir Visic, who is already in the transfer portal after playing last year at Kentucky. He's already committed to Arkansas. So we already know that Coach Cal has one of his players from last year's roster on his roster at Arkansas. And now we know he has one of his recruits that he was expecting to have on his roster at Kentucky now is going to be with him at Arkansas in Karter Knox. Knox is a 6'6" wing. He last played at the Overtime Elite in Atlanta. Very talented young man, and a loss for Kentucky. But very likely, certainly, I think at this point, not the only loss for Kentucky. Not by a long shot. Because as we're recording right now on Wednesday evening, both Boogie Fland and Billy Richmond, who were both previous Kentucky commits who have decommitted since John Calipari's departure, both of them are visiting Arkansas. And I mean, like right now, as I'm recording this, they are in Fayetteville, visiting with the staff, visiting with the team, visiting with the coaches. By the time you're listening to this, it would not surprise me if one or both of them have committed to Arkansas. Boogie Fland is a 6'2" guard from White Plains, New York. He has no other visits scheduled except for this visit to Arkansas. So if it goes well, boom, he's committed. He's going to Fayetteville. He's going to be a Hog. If it doesn't go well, he's back to the drawing board. Does that mean he reconsiders Kentucky? Not sure. Not sure if Mark Pope can convince these guys to reconsider Kentucky at this point. I'm sure he's going to try, as he should, but somebody like Fland could end up looking anywhere else. He's going to get recruited. And if he opens up his recruitment fully, tons and tons and tons of places are going to make those calls to him. He is currently 19th in the 24/7 composite rankings, a 5-star guard, really talented. If you've watched the highlight clips of him, you can see why there is so much interest and why Kentucky and Calipari, and now I guess Arkansas and Calipari sort of feel like the right fit. He's the kind of player that Calipari has recruited a lot in the last couple of years. Billy Richmond, similar situation. He's more of a wing than a guard. He's 6'5", kind of plays a small forward-ish role. He's from Camden, New Jersey, 25th in the 247 composite rankings. So all these guys are really close to each other in the rankings. Knox is 22nd, Fland 19th, and now Richmond at 25th, still 5-star status. He is also visiting Arkansas. We heard confirmation from rivals that Boogie Fland does not have any other visits currently lined up. Not 100% sure if that is the case with Billy Richmond as well. But my suspicion is that with Knox already committed to Arkansas, if Cal convinces one of Fland and Richmond to just straight up commit to before they even leave Fayetteville to say, look, I'm in, I'm posting it on socials, I'm in, I'm going to Fayetteville, I'm following Calipari to Arkansas, let's get it. If one of these guys posts it, I bet they both end up there. And then you have 3 of Calipari's 5-star recruits who were supposed to go to Kentucky in the 2024 class, now all following him to Fayetteville. I would not be surprised, again, if by the time you're listening to this, this is already confirmed. That wouldn't shock me at all. But also, I don't think this is surprising. And I certainly don't think if you're a Kentucky fan, like, I don't want to tell fans how to fan and how to feel. I don't think that it should be surprising that these players are no longer going to come to Kentucky. I was going to say it shouldn't be that big of a deal, but anytime you lose 3 5-stars in a span of a week, it's not going to feel great. It's not going to feel great. There's just no other way to potentially look at that. And right now, Mark Pope, we know he's busy working the phones. We know there's a lot of transfers who have been connected to Kentucky. They did just land Amari Williams out of Drexel. That's a very nice addition for them. But in the midst of what I expect to be potentially 3 5-star players leaving Kentucky, not only leaving Kentucky, they've already decommitted, but all ending up at Arkansas. The best thing Mark Pope can do is to find a way to get another big headline, whether it's landing Great Osibor out of Utah State in the transfer portal, Kobe Brea from Dayton, any of the other handful of veteran recruits or veteran transfers that they're looking at. I think that would be a potential big win for them. Also, they do know that they're keeping Travis Perry. Not a huge win necessarily. He's a 4-star. He's 75th in the composite rankings, so quite a bit lower. The rankings don't always mean everything. 6'2" point guard from Kentucky, one of the most prolific high school basketball players in the state of Kentucky ever. Mark Pope has convinced Travis Perry to stay and to come to Lexington next year. So they do have somebody coming in the recruiting class. They add Colin Chandler, who is a former BYU commit, who's going to come to Lexington as well. And then the big one right now is kind of the battle as it is Jaden Quintance. He's a number 8th ranked player in the 24/7 sports composite ranking. So he's the big fish out of this group right now, 5-star, 6'9" center from Raleigh, North Carolina. And he is decommitted from Kentucky. And at first it was reported that he is not interested in going to Arkansas. Since that has happened, it sounds like he is going to potentially visit Arkansas, but he has a planned visit to Memphis, and he already came back from a visit to Louisville. And it sounds like there was maybe some optimism he would stay at Kentucky. There've kind of been as of right now, there hasn't been any firm answer either way. My suspicion is he's probably not going to Kentucky, but it also doesn't sound like he's necessarily inclined to go to Arkansas. So this it wouldn't be a win for Kentucky, but it wouldn't be as devastating as seeing another player end up following Calipari to Arkansas. I think Quinton's is probably going to end up at either Louisville or Memphis. Sounds like his visit with Pat Kelsey and the Cardinal staff went really well. So perhaps that could be a really big addition for Pat Kelsey in Louisville. Keep him in the state of Kentucky, just playing at the rival school over there. Memphis makes a lot of sense as well. We've heard rumors of a few other schools involved, potentially Arizona State, but my guess is it's either Memphis or Louisville, and I'm hopeful that he goes to one of those two, breaks up this Calipari versus Mark Pope kind of battle that we're having, and I think it'd be fun to see him end up somewhere else. And then the last thing I want to talk about here, we've focused primarily on high schoolers in this conversation of the Kentucky versus Arkansas, but Ugonna Onyenso has entered the transfer portal. This is noteworthy because he initially declared for the NBA draft and made it seem like he had 0.0% intention of playing college basketball ever again. He said, I'm fully focused on the draft process. That's my goal. That's where I'm going. And then somewhat quietly, a week, 10 days-ish later, he puts his name in the transfer portal, likely meaning that he got feedback from scouts, analysts, whomever that said, hey, we want to see you play more college basketball. We want to see you in a bigger minute role, maybe with the ball in your hands more. Like, he never played a huge role for Kentucky, but he's an incredibly impactful rim protector. I think that in a bigger role where he gets to shine more offensively and also just gets more minutes to shine defensively, he could rocket up draft boards and be somebody that is in that first round or at least early second round conversation in 2025 if he lands in the right spot in the transfer portal. Whether that's a return to Kentucky, probably not, but you never know. Mark Pope, John Calipari, very different coaches. I'd be very surprised if he followed Calipari to Arkansas, because that would just be more of the same for him. There's other schools that could be involved. As I'm recording this right now, we haven't seen a list or anything specifically show up for Onyenso. So this is kind of more just off the top of my head. Illinois, he's got a connection to the coaching staff there. Duke could use some extra rim protection. We mentioned Carolina could use some a big after losing Armando Bacot. So there's other schools, of course, that could be involved here as well. But Onyenso is a name to watch here as somebody who could transfer somewhere outside of the Kentucky-Arkansas kind of battle right now and end up being an impactful player somewhere else in college basketball. Well, folks, we got a six-pack of transfer portal commitments to discuss, all with a little distinct West Coast flavor in that six-pack, and all coming up in just a second. But first, I want to tell you today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, it is playoff time in both the NBA and the NHL. Baseball is in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every single game. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. So bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use. And since we talked about Carolina earlier, we'll roll with that. They are currently at plus 1,600 odds to win it all in 2025. If you like those odds, especially now that RJ Davis is back in the mix, then what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic W. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, folks, closing out the show today, talking transfer portal six-pack. For those of you who are regular listeners, you know on Mondays, Isaac and I typically do a six-pack to close out the show. During the season, it's usually us recapping games that we didn't get to cover during the first two segments of the show. In the offseason, it's often just, hey, here's a bunch of transfers that happened, or players entering the portal, committing in the portal, that we just haven't got a chance to talk about yet. And that's what we're doing here on today's show to close it out. We're talking about 6 transfers, and I said it's got a West Coast flavor. Maybe it's a little happier for our six-pack today, because we're talking about players who are either transferring to or transferring from West Coast schools. Of course, half these schools are now Big 10 or Big 12 schools because the Pac-12 no longer exists. But we are going to start with Trey Townsend from Oakland, the Horizon Player of the Year, a player who maybe he didn't get quite as much attention at Oakland as some of his teammates did in that upset win over Kentucky, but Townsend was a critical piece for that team. He is heading to Tucson to play with Tommy Lloyd and the Arizona Wildcats. 6'6" forward. He's got 1 year of eligibility remaining. Averaged 17 points, 8 boards, 3 assists, and 1.5 steals per game last year. He shot a really high percentage from 3, but less than 1 attempt per game. So not necessarily a huge part of his game, but he's going to help replace Keshad Johnson and Pella Larson, the two kind of forwards that were starting for Tommy Lloyd's team last year, both guys who are in the NBA draft process. Of course, Umar Ballo is also out the door for Arizona, and Kylan Boswell. This is a team that's got a lot of holes to fill still, and Townsend's going to come over, and he considered Ohio State, considered Michigan and Michigan State. So this is a really nice pickup for Tommy Lloyd and Arizona. Next up, I want to talk about Brandon Angel going from Stanford to Oregon, a move that is going from the ACC to the Big Ten. I'm not going to get sick of making those jokes because it is so weird to think about a Stanford to Oregon move in that way. Angel's a 6'8" forward. He's got 1 year of eligibility remaining. He spent the past 4 years all at Stanford under Coach Jared Haas, the last 2 as a starter. Averaged about 13 points and 5 boards last year. He's a sharp shooter, though, 6'8", and shoot 45% from 3 on about 2.5 attempts per game. A stretch 4 who should pair well with Kwame Evans for the Ducks. Potentially, they're working on trying to get N'Faly Dante back in the mix for Oregon as well. Dante, Evans, and Angel would be a really nice front court for Dana Altman's team. Number 3, Joshua Jefferson from St. Mary's has committed in the transfer portal to join TJ Otzelberger and the Cyclones of Iowa State. This is a great fit for Jefferson. For those of you who didn't watch a lot of St. Mary's basketball last year, Jefferson, 6'8" forward. He's got 2 years remaining. He broke out as a sophomore, averaged about 10 points and 6.5 boards last year. He suffered a knee injury and missed the last 3 weeks or so of the season. But prior to that, he is an elite on-ball defender, an elite help defender, a developing scorer who should be able to kind of blossom more offensively in a system that's not the one that Randy Bennett and the Gales run. This is a really great fit. I cannot stress that enough. And for Iowa State to be returning the majority of the rest of the players that they need, Monsilovic is coming back, Lipsey's coming back, Gilbert's coming back, to add a player like Joshua Jefferson, there's a reason that Iowa State's getting a lot of top 5 love as a team next year, and Jefferson adds to that in a major way. Number 4, another player transferring out of a West Coast school. That is Vincent Iwuchukwu, who is going from USC to join Rick Pitino and the Johnnies. This is a 7'1" center, 2 years remaining for Iwuchukwu in eligibility. I played 31 games last year, started 11 of them, but only played about 16 minutes per game. Averaged about 5.5 points, a little under 4 boards, shot about 51% from the field. This is a defensive addition. Much like Joshua Jefferson's primarily a defensive addition for Iowa State. Same with Iwuchukwu coming to St. John's. Pitino said it. We need more defenders on this roster. And he's gone out and made that a priority in the transfer portal. This is not a player who's going to jump off the page stat-wise. Like I said, 5 points, 4 boards, but he's 7'1". He's long in the right system. I think he could really thrive as a rim protector for Rick Pitino and the Red Storm. Number 5, we're sticking with USC. They lose Vincent Iwuchukwu, but they add Matt Noling from Yale, transferring to the Trojans, 6'5" wing. He's got 1 year of eligibility remaining, averaged about 11.5 points, 5 boards, and 2.5 assists last year for the Bulldogs of Yale. 58% shooter on 2s, but he's not a 3-point threat at all. So you're adding a 6'5" wing who doesn't space the floor. That's right, baby. Eric Musselman bringing his style of basketball from Fayetteville down to LA. This is a good addition, though. We can joke about the 3-point shooting if we want, but for a team that lost Kobe Johnson, the team that lost Isaiah Collier, that lost Boogie Ellis, that lost Bronny James, USC just needs guards, and Matt Noling's a pretty good one. So I think this is going to end up fine for USC, but yes, it is funny that one of the first major transfer portal additions for Musselman's team is somebody who doesn't shoot it all that well from beyond the arc. And number 6, the final one here on the show, Jordan Pope, going from Oregon State, now a WCC team, to Texas, now an SEC team. That is another weird one to say out loud, but this is a huge addition for Rodney Terry and the Longhorns. Pope's a 6'2" guard. He's got 2 years of eligibility remaining. Last year for Oregon State, he exploded, 17.5 points per game, 3.5 assists, 2.6 boards. A really efficient scorer as well, about 50% on 2-pointers, but 37% from 3, and that was on about 5.5 attempts per game. Everybody wanted Jordan Pope. There was a whole bunch of blue blood, high-profile programs in on Pope, but Rodney Terry made a big effort right away to land him. He's now going to come in to help replace Tyrese Hunter, who transferred to Memphis, to replace Max Asmus, who is out of eligibility. They needed more guard depth in Austin. They get it in Jordan Pope. Really nice addition for Rodney Terry's team. It's going to wrap it up for today here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Thank you so much to those of you who have and routinely make this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Remind you can join us on our Discord channel, which is free, and there is a link in the show notes. Come hang out with us, talking college hoops and transfer portal updates all day long. Isaac and I will be back with you on Friday, getting you ready for the weekend and the NBA draft declaration deadline, and then into next week when we have the transfer portal entrance deadline as well. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, as always, peace out.